Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Theresa May has told MPs they need to hold their nerve over Brexit, saying the ongoing talks with the EU are at a crucial stage. In a statement to the House of Commons, the Prime Minister said she still believes it's possible to find a deal that Parliament can support. Jeremy Corbyn accused Mrs May of running down the clock in order to blackmail MPs into supporting what he called a deeply flawed deal. Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar reports.
Clear the way, Prime Minister coming through. Time's almost up to cut a Brexit deal with Brussels MPs might support. Each time, Mrs May's finding MPs less patient than before.
Order! Prime Minister's statement.
But her only option today, another appeal. Stick with me. Same message, only now with more urgency.
The talks are at a crucial stage, and we now all need to hold our nerve to get the changes this House requires and deliver Brexit on time.
The Labour leader's keen to offer suggestions, but much keener to expose Mrs May's appeal for time as a ploy.
It appears the Prime Minister has just one real tactic: to run down the clock, hoping members of this House are blackmailed into supporting a deeply flawed deal.
Jeremy Corbyn wants Britain to stick with EU customs rules. Mrs May says no, forget compromise there. And Mrs May won't rule out leaving with no deal. Some agree, but many don't.
The Prime Minister not only is kicking the can down the road yet again, she again refuses to take no deal off the table.
To get that better deal, you've got to keep no deal on the table as a negotiating tool.
There's a plan by Labour and Tory MPs to take control. If Mrs May can't strike a deal, the Commons will support.
If she can't get a deal in place by the middle of March, there's a real risk we'll end up with no deal by accident. So at that point, she would need to come forward and say, does she want no deal or does she want to extend negotiations? And then Parliament needs to decide.
MPs planning a takeover will hold back this week, but could force a vote in a fortnight, ready to take control in March. Rebels believe ministers could join in.
I would say to each and every one of them, look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself the honest question of whether where we're heading at the moment, which is probably a no deal, whether that is acceptable for the future of Britain. And I don't think it is, and I'm pretty sure that a number of current ministerial colleagues would agree with me.
If unhappy ministers do rebel, Brexit could be up for grabs. Some believe Mrs May would rather see MPs take control than be remembered as the Prime Minister who split her party. But her real ambition is to beat the odds and deliver Brexit herself, hoping some Labour MPs vote with her and help her win. Big moments seem to come along as regularly as buses. The numbers don't look like adding up to a government defeat this week, but the outcome's getting closer. It could arrive very late, and it might just change the course of Brexit. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Now to the day's other main story in Theresa May's effort to save her Brexit deal. Mrs May urged MPs to hold their nerve, but she was accused of running down the clock, increasing the risk of a no-deal Brexit. And the food and drink industry has told ITV News how that uncertainty is prompting it to spend millions of pounds stockpiling goods. Leading businesses warn there could be empty shelves and price rises if the UK leaves with no deal. Our consumer editor Chris Choi has this exclusive report.
In vast warehouses, systematic and pricey stockpiling is now underway, costing hundreds of millions of pounds, and all in case of a no-deal Brexit. In West Bromwich, Jason Warrer is a wholesaler running a £200 million food and drink business.
Well, I think mainly it's the uncertainty. The difficulty is we're right up to the wire now.
Here they're spending millions building up vast reserves in case of disruption.
We're talking huge quantities here. 4 or 5 extra weeks of stock could translate to something in the region of 300, 400, 500 pallets.
We've seen the food industry's own Brexit survey findings. Almost 70% of companies are stockpiling in case of a no-deal exit from the EU. Around 3/4 have deployed staff on contingency plans for a disorderly Brexit. And 10% say a no-deal would mean serious risk of redundancies, even a potential threat to the existence of companies. An insider at one leading supermarket says £250 million is now set aside for its Brexit plans. And Majestic Wines told us it stockpiled 1 million extra bottles worth £8 million in case of disruption. In Beminster, Rebecca Verco is manager of a tea bag manufacturer's. Firms fear increased paperwork as well as tariffs on imports and exports. Here they've hoarded the equivalent of 250 million extra tea bags.
We've been stockpiling, so we've been bringing in ingredients, been bringing in raw materials and making sure we've got enough so that we can then double our stockpiling in the UK and in Europe on both sides of the border.
In Greater Manchester, Jed Futter is a former supermarket executive advising grocery suppliers on price rises. Firms are spending millions on these preparations with cost implications for shoppers.
Ultimately, this is going to have an impact on shelf for the customer. So the price of food, depending on the category, will be increasing over these next few months. We're already seeing it in some categories already. So the customers will be paying more money for their food.
The industry hasn't seen stockpiling on this scale for decades, a measure of just how seriously they take the risk of a no-deal Brexit. Chris Choi, ITV News.
All those warnings seem unlikely to sway the Prime Minister, who today told the Commons she will press on with further talks with the EU. With the clock ticking, Mrs May insisted she will deliver Brexit on time. But ITV News has learnt even her own Brexit negotiator doubts that will happen. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, our political correspondent Romilly Weeks reports from Westminster.
Even as the clock hurtles towards Brexit Day, the Prime Minister's tactic that she laid before MPs today is still, give me a bit more time.
The talks are at a crucial stage, and we now all need to hold our nerve to get the changes this House requires and deliver Brexit on time. By getting the changes we need to the backstop, by protecting and enhancing workers' rights and environmental protections, and by enhancing the role of Parliament in the next phase of negotiations, I believe we can reach a deal that this House can support.
Her aim to head off an attempt this week by MPs to vote against the option of leaving with no deal.
In truth, Mr Speaker, it appears the Prime Minister has just one real tactic: to run down the clock, hoping members of this House are blackmailed into supporting a deeply flawed deal.
What all this manoeuvring means is that although there will still be another vote on Brexit options in there on Valentine's Day, it's unlikely to be a bad date for the Prime Minister. With the Prime Minister essentially saying to rebels, give me a couple more weeks to negotiate and then you can have your vote to try to take no deal off the table. Yvette Cooper is one of those behind a bill to make sure that happens.
There's a real risk that if she can't get a deal back quickly now, then we could end up with no deal at all. And that's why, if there's no deal in place in the next few weeks, then we will table this bill. It's a common sense approach that just says there should be parliamentary safeguards so that the government can't just push us over the edge of the cliff by accident without actually coming back to Parliament first.
The Prime Minister is still claiming she'll deliver Brexit on time. She might have averted a Valentine's Day defeat this week, but a body of MPs have not given up hope that by mid-March, no deal will run out of road. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
And ITV News can tonight reveal the government's Brexit negotiator believes MPs will be forced to choose between the Prime Minister's deal or a delay to Brexit. Angus Walker is in Paris. Angus, it is quite an astonishing admission, isn't it, at this stage, from civil servant Ollie Robbins?
Yes, I'm in Paris because the Foreign Secretary is here trying to convince French ministers to support the British government's search for a new deal, but we don't know what that deal is going to be. And late last night I overheard comments made by Ollie Robbins, the UK's Brexit negotiator, in a hotel bar in Brussels. Now, he was suggesting a strategy where MPs would be presented in March with a choice between a deal or a delay, and possibly a lengthy delay. The suggestion being that that would somehow focus minds. Extraordinary comments from a man who's normally very private, and I put Ollie Robbins' comments to the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, earlier today.
Well, I haven't heard Ollie Robbins' comments, but the truth is that an extension doesn't help anyone, because an extension simply means that we defer a decision for longer. The truth is, what no one wants is Brexit paralysis, where the uncertainty around Brexit, which is so damaging for businesses, carries on.
Now, we've had some reaction from Downing Street to those comments made by Ollie Robbins, and Downing Street spokesperson says, "We don't propose to comment on alleged remarks from a private conversation. The government's focus is on securing the improvements Parliament needs to pass a deal." But fascinating to hear Ollie Robbins last night at a time when ministers are touring European capitals and talks are going on, usually behind closed doors.
Indeed, Angus Walker in Paris tonight. Thank you. Now, Theresa May has told MPs to hold their nerve as she said she needed more time to persuade Europe to accept changes to her Brexit deal. Labour accusing her of offering more excuses and more delays as the clock ticked relentlessly down towards Brexit Day. And another crunch day in the Commons is approaching after the Labour MP Yvette Cooper said she'd be tabling a vote on her bill ruling out a no-deal Brexit at the end of this month. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary.
Well, as you say, the most important thing that Theresa May wanted out of today was more time to help, as some in government were putting it, the important negotiations that were going on in Brussels. Well, on one level, that didn't go terribly well, in that people in Brussels were saying, what important negotiations? You haven't come out here with a new plan or one that we can possibly engage with. On another level, though, it did kind of work, because a rebellion that was going to damage the Prime Minister's cause, that was coming down the tracks potentially this week, well, the people who were mounting that rebellion have stood down their troops for 2 weeks. Now, this is the amendment that would have forced the government, if they hadn't got a deal through the House of Commons, would have forced them to ask the European Union for more time, to extend the actual Brexit date. Now, the people who were trying to mount that rebellion, as I say, stood down their troops for 2 weeks. That's probably because they didn't have enough troops, but they still think that they can muster and come back and force that onto the Prime Minister. The other interesting thing that we got today, though, was a little bit more insight into just how much more time the Prime Minister thinks she needs, because she announced in the House of Commons that she has it in mind to fast-track the ratification process for the withdrawal agreement, to put it through the House of Commons even quicker. And without going into all the constitutional niceties of that, what it suggests is that the Prime Minister's deal or no deal moment might, in her mind, be not in February, not even necessarily in early March, but very, very close indeed to the Brexit date. What you saw today with the Prime Minister in the House of Commons was her very much focused on that vote, trying to, as one MP put it, hand out sweeties to different MPs, groups that she might try and woo to help her win that vote when it eventually comes. Here's how the day went here. The Prime Minister insists meeting like these in Strasbourg today must be allowed time to see if they can come up with changes to the backstop. There were more talks in Brussels last night. The Foreign Secretary in Paris today. One EU figure was asked what he'd learnt from Theresa May when they met for talks.
I will be very honest with you. I didn't hear the last day new proposals.
The Prime Minister insisted she was exploring how to get a deal that MPs would back, but said she needed more time.
The talks are at a crucial stage, and we now all need to hold our nerve to get the changes this House requires and deliver Brexit on time.
In truth, Mr. Speaker, it appears the Prime Minister has just one real tactic: to run down the clock, hoping members of this House are blackmailed into supporting a deeply flawed deal.
He talked about running down the clock. No, I wanted to have this sorted before Christmas. I bought a deal back from the rest of Christmas.
We've just heard from the Prime Minister that she wanted this concluded in December. Mr. Speaker, talk about rewriting history. It was the Prime Minister that denied us the right to have the meaningful vote and to try and rewrite history, and she sits there laughing. You know, sometimes you should be honest with yourself, never mind being honest with the people of the United Kingdom.
The Prime Minister used this moment to try to woo back Tory pro-Brexit rebels. She said recent contact with Jeremy Corbyn had not won her over to his policy supporting membership of the EU Customs Union.
Mr. Speaker, one area where the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, and I do not agree is on his suggestion that the UK should remain a member of the EU Customs Union. I would gently point out that the House of Commons has already voted against this.
There was a worry that she might be tempted to try and enter into a customs union in order to get Labour votes and get the deal through, but that would have been completely against the Conservative Party manifesto that nearly every Tory MP stood on at the general election. And she herself told the House today it would fetter our ability to do trade deals, so you wouldn't really have left the European Union. She emphatically ruled that out today, and we welcome it.
The Prime Minister was also trying to woo some Labour MPs sitting behind the Labour leader. She promised workers' rights would stay in step with the EU after Brexit and might even leapfrog ahead.
The UK has a proud tradition of leading the way in workers' rights. In the interests of building support across the House, we're also prepared to commit to asking Parliament whether it wishes to follow suit whenever the EU changes its standards in these areas.
There is still a lot of scepticism on my benches and in my party, even from MPs like me that know we have to vote for a deal, that the Prime Minister just isn't going far enough to deliver on what we expect of her.
One of your Labour MP colleagues said to me he gave it sort of 3.5 out of 5 in terms of Theresa May reaching across to Labour MPs.
I think that's fair. I think she was trying to reach out. I just think she sometimes lacks some of the empathy to do that.
No sooner had the Prime Minister finished her appeal for more time than the European Parliament's Brexit chief tweeted out, "I ask myself, what are these negotiations at a crucial state?" raised by Theresa May in the House of Commons. In Cabinet today there was no discussion about Brexit, though they did discuss food waste and fly tipping. 45 days from the Brexit date, it was, one minister said, utterly surreal.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative MP James Cleverly, who's backed Theresa May's deal, and I asked him to clarify precisely what negotiations are taking place at the moment between the UK and the EU.
Well, the Prime Minister and her team are in an ongoing, pretty much a constant state of negotiation. So there are negotiations happening. Look, I don't have the full details. The Prime Minister made the statement that she has been speaking with heads of government around Europe.
So nobody really knows what's going on.
What is going on, Christian, what is going on is that the Prime Minister, the government, has recognised that the original draft of the withdrawal agreement was not accepted by Parliament. It's going to take time, and it's getting closer to the wire than I think anyone would like. But we always knew that EU negotiations go to the 11th hour. That's been their pattern, that's been their history, and that's what it seems is going to be happening this time.
The other thing Theresa May was asked repeatedly in the Commons today was, if there is still no deal by March the 29th, you're still in talks, these mystery talks, and nothing has gone through the House of Commons, are you going to take us out of the European Union without a deal? Now, she wouldn't answer. Do you think we should just leave on March the 29th regardless?
I think it is essential that we honour the referendum result. I think
on March the 29th?
Well, March 29th is the date set by the Article 50 process. So if everything runs according to the Article 50 process, if there is no deal, if there is no withdrawal agreement, then the default position is we leave on the 29th
But that
of March.
is a choice,
that is
isn't
not,
it? Because it is a choice as to whether to go ahead with Brexit on that day, because
the choice was made by parliamentarians.
I know, but parliamentarians can change their minds.
That date was a decision that was made by British parliamentarians.
To change that, mightn't they?
Well, the EU have made it clear that any extension to that Article 50 date, the 29th of March, can't just be because we haven't got our act together in the UK Parliament, because we haven't come to an agreement. What is really essential is that British parliamentarians understand that we have to distill down all the various options in front of us to come down to something that we can collectively agree upon.
You're a Brexiteer, you voted for Brexit. You believe if we don't have a deal on March 29th, we should go ahead and Brexit. We should not seek any more negotiating time.
Well, these negotiations were always going to go to the 11th hour.
Because, the European Union can see the debate that's going on in the House of Commons. They can see that the House of Commons has voted in a non-binding way against a no-deal Brexit, and that they are now threatening to pass a motion that would demand the government asks for more time. So whatever pressure you think the government is putting on the European Union by saying, well, we do dare to go out without a deal, is also being weakened by the reality, which is that nobody believes you will.
No, but the Prime Minister, in her statement today, made it absolutely clear that it's not enough for parliamentarians just to say, oh, I don't think we should leave without a deal. There has to be a mechanism. And actually, the best way of making sure that we don't leave without a deal is to vote for a deal. But the default position on the 29th of March is we leave the European Union without an agreement. That is not anyone's desired option. So the best thing that parliamentarians can do is to come to an agreement, vote through a withdrawal agreement that allows us to leave the European Union in good order. That's what we should be doing. That's what I hope parliamentarians will do over the next few weeks.
James Cleverly, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now is the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, and you are now part of a new attempt to have a vote that would stop us having no deal Brexit on March the 29th. Could you just explain what it is?
Yes, the intention is that if the Prime Minister has not succeeded in getting a deal through Parliament by the week beginning the 25th of February, there will firstly be a day when she has conceded. There will have to be a debate in Parliament on an amendable motion. And if Parliament wishes, then Parliament can use the following day to enact primary legislation requiring the government, if it goes through both houses of Parliament, to request an Article 50 extension to prevent us crashing out on the 29th of March.
So this is very similar to the Cooper Amendment that was defeated after several Labour MPs rebelled. What makes you think you would get it through next time?
I think there are a number of things. Firstly, we've been able to be much more flexible in terms of the period of the extension. I think some Labour MPs were worried about the length of time proposed in the original extension, although that could have been changed by amendment. Secondly, it's going to be very dependent on the views, obviously, of Conservative colleagues. But should we not have a concluded deal by the 27th of March, we are entering into a period of really serious national crisis. Crashing out without a deal is a disastrous option for this country, and anybody who pays any attention to what's going on a day-to-day basis will come to realise just how disastrous it is. And so it must be stopped, and I think we will find that there are many colleagues who at that point will take the decision that we have got to take steps to be able to stop it.
Won't you weaken the Prime Minister's hand in her negotiations if there actually are negotiations going on?
No, because ultimately, to make a threat of doing something which is going to be uniquely damaging to this country's future is not an option. Quite apart from anything else, it's not going to have very much traction with our European partners.
Well, I mean, that's clearly not how the government sees it, or people like James Cleverly.
Well, I'm afraid I think they're mistaken, and the evidence of their mistake is all around us in terms of the likely damage which is going to come to this country from a no-deal Brexit compared to the damage that might be caused to our EU partners. The damage will be largely on us and will be very considerable, and I, as an MP, are not prepared to countenance it.
Do you believe government ministers will resign in order to back this amendment?
I have no idea what government ministers will choose to do in 2 weeks' time, but there is a lot of evidence that there are ministers in government who are deeply concerned about the possibility of a no-deal Brexit.
What would a delay achieve, though? I mean, if you can't get a deal after 2.5 years, why would a couple more months make any difference?
Perhaps we should then take the advantage of the pause to consider why it is that we cannot get a deal through the House of Commons. And the answer, for me, is that the entire Brexit process is flawed. That's why we can't reach an agreement, because there is in fact no form of Brexit that is going to benefit our country.
But you are in the minority, aren't you, at the moment?
Well, I may be a minority, but I sometimes think that the penny is beginning to drop with quite a lot of people, and many of my colleagues, that is in fact the underlying problem. It's not the Prime Minister's negotiating weakness or her inability to negotiate. She's done her best. The truth is, this is a very bad outcome for our country, and it's going to get much worse if we go for a no-deal Brexit.
Dominic Grieve, thank you.
Thank you.
I've been